Hashem, today's daf yomi is Shevuos daf then Dalit, Shevuos 44. Today's daf is dedicated for Shemir for the Chayalim. That's all for the Shvuyim and the Yeshua for Am Yisrael in this Eitz Tzara. Now we had said previously we're going to start on 43b, 7 lines from the bottom. We had said first in our Mishnah that if you have a loan, and then you get a mashko and you get a collateral for the loan, you have to, and you lose the collateral, you have to pay back, deduct that from the loan. But then Shmuel taught on 43b that actually if you lose the collateral, you lose the entire value of the loan. So the Gemara first suggested that the way to reconcile these two Shmuel with the Mishnah is that our Mishnah is talking about a case where you specify that it's just the value of the collateral, not the actual value of the loan. But now the Gemara says, Lema Ketanai. Actually, maybe there's a dispute amongst the Tanaim about this issue. Maybe it's actually a Tanaitic dispute. Because we learned in the Brisa, Malvas Chavero Mashkon, if somebody lends his friend money on the basis of a collateral, he lends his friend money, and his friend gives him a collateral. And then he loses the mashkon. Then the lender should take an oath, and after he takes the oath, he collects. He collects the rest of his money. So basically, here this is not like Shmuel, this is like our Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer is saying Yishave takes an oath and then he takes the rest of the money. But Rabbi Akiva says, Yahu Sheyomarlo, no, the borrower is able to say to him, Kumel Visani, the only reason basically Rabbi Akiva says the borrower can say to the lender, Kumel Visani, Ela Mashkon, the only reason why you lent me the Mashkon, the only reason why you loaned me the money was for the mashkon. Avara mashkon. Well, now that you've lost the mashkon, ava mausecha, you've lost your collateral. Meaning to say that this is like Shmuel. So at first glance, Rabbi Akiva seems to be like Shmuel. Rabbi Eliezer seems to be like our Mishnah. But then the Brisa continues. You lend 1,000 zuz on a note. And he also placed a mashkon in addition to the shtar, in addition to the note. Everybody be of the position that if he loses the mashkon, then the lender's also lost his money. So this will be explained below. So the Gemara says, let's talk about this dispute between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. What's the scenario? Either shavi shiur zuzeh. If the mashkon is the equivalent of the loan, my time with Rabbi Eliezer, then Rabbi Eliezer doesn't make sense. Then why does Rabbi Eliezer say that? Why does Rabbi Eliezer say that he can still collect the debt? He should be, if he loses it, he's lost it. It must be that the collateral is not worth the amount of the loan. Will be the Shmuel kamiflagi, and must be Rabbi Akiva hold like Shmuel. Shmuel is in agreement with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer disagrees. Gemara says, no, it's not the case. Whoa, that's not the case. What we're talking about here is bidelo shavi. We're talking about the case where it's not the value, where it would not be the value of the loan. Everybody would agree that the law is not like Shmuel. Meaning to say, everybody would say where if it's not the value of the loan, you just deduct the price. I don't like Shmuel, but like our Mishnah. But here what they're arguing about is the Deshavi Shir Zuzi Ubi the Rabbi Yitzchak Kamifli. They're arguing about where it is worth the value of the loan. It's worth the value of the loan, but they're still arguing about basis of an argument to Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak, Minayim Balchov Shekona Mashkon. Rabbi Yitzchak says that a creditor actually has acquired the mashkon. And how do we know that? Because it says that if you collect the mashkon from somebody else, you have to give it back to him so that he can use it. And meaning if you collect his pajamas as a mashkon, you give him back the pajamas at night to sleep in. And for you will be a charity. So if that's the case, im eno kone mashkon tzedakah minayin lo. If he hasn't acquired it, then how is it a charity? So we see from here, this proves that the creditor has in fact acquired the mashkon. So basically what we've said is we're in the middle of 44A. 44A.
I got it to work.
We're in 44A in the middle. So we're in 44A in the middle. It says Minayim Bachok Shekona Mashkon. So Rabbi Yitzchak is saying he's acquired it, but according to those who don't agree, in this case it would be the other opinion who argues with Rabbi Yitzchak. He says he's not acquired the mashkon. Since he's not acquired the mashkon, he's a shomer chinam. He's just watching somebody else's, and so therefore, since he's just watching somebody else's, therefore he's not responsible for it. So Rabbi Eliezer, who says you just deduct the value, he's saying he hasn't acquired it. But Rabbi Kiva, who says that you lose the whole loan, he says you acquire it. So the Gemara says, Lema Rabbi Yitzchak Tanaihi. So let's assume the Rabbi Yitzchak's position is the Machokas. Do you want to say that Tanayim? The Gemara says, do you really want to say that? V'tizbra, do you really want to say that Rabbi Yitzchak's position is the Machokas Tanayim? Eimer Dama Rabbi Yitzchak. Maybe Rabbi Yitzchak says his position, Shemashkeno Shelo B'Shas Halva. He said, maybe Rabbi Yitzchak says that you acquire it if you give him the mashkon, not during the time of the loan. He took it at a later date. Meaning to say, it wasn't at the time of the loan, he gave it later, so therefore it's clearly meant to convey ownership. That's what could go on Ayadei Bezdin, like the court made you give it. That's what the pasuk refers to. And say where it wasn't at the time of the loan. But mashkano b'shas halva mi amar. If it was at the time of the loan, it's clearly not meant to acquire. It's clearly not just collateral for the loan. So ela mashkano shelo b'salva. So the Gemara says we must say that if the collateral was given not during the time of the loan, everybody agrees. If the collateral is not at the time of the loan, we agree with Rabbi Yitzchak's position that you've acquired it. The mashkano b'shas alva'aso u'b'shomer aveda kamifli. So here what we're talking about is where the mashkon happened during the time of the loan, and what we're talking about a situation is where a person is a shomer, a watchman for a lost object. Then we learn shomer aveda. Let's say you're a watchman for a lost object. Rabbi says kashomer chinam. Rabbi says you're like a shomer chinam, an unpaid watchman. Rav Yosef Amar Kashomer Sachar. Rav Yosef says you're considered like a paid watchman. So why does Rav Yosef say that if you're a watchman not during the time of, if you're a watchman of a lost object, you consider like a paid watchman? So the Gemara in Baba Kama explains because then you're exempt from other mitzvos, and so you wouldn't have to give money to a poor person. And so therefore you're considered to be, therefore you're making money. A second possible reason is because it's a biblical mitzvah and you're going to get a reward, you're considered to be like you're getting a reward. So therefore, this is the dispute. So if you're a shomer chinam, you'll be exempt from having to pay back the value. But if you're shomer sachar, so if you're a shomer sachar, then you're not exempt from having to pay back the collateral. And so they're arguing about that concept here. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva is agreeing with Rav Yosef that if you're a watch, that basically this person, this lender, according to Rabbi Akiva, is like a shomer sachar, is like Rav Yosef. says you're a shomer sachar and you're a paid watchman, and so therefore you lose it. You lose it all. Whereas according to Eliezer, you're a shomer chinam and you don't lose your value. So the Gemara says, "Lema de Rav Yosef tonight." Do you want to say that Rav Yosef's position is in machokes tanayim? So Gemara says, "No, we're not talking about that." But Shomer Aveda Koyalma Islu de Rav Yosef. If it'll be a Shomer Aveda, if it'll be a case where you're watching a lost object, everybody would agree with Rav Yosef's position that you're a Shomer Sachar, that you're a paid watchman. So here what we're talking about is whether the lender, where the lender needs to use the mashkon. And he says in advance that if I need to use it, I'm allowed to. So that's what's going on here. Mar Savar. So one position is Rabbi Akiva's other position, mitzvah ka'avid, that he's performing a mitzvah by lending money. And so therefore, with respect to the mashkon, since he's paying him for the use of the mashkon, he's like watching a lost object. So that's what tzarech mashkon l'shtamish bo. Look at Rashi. Rashi says he needs to use the mashkon and he deducts the price. He deducts it from the debt. The amount of money he spends on the mashkon. Rabbi Eliezer's other position, keeping the tzarech mashkon, since he needs it, ain't ka mitzvah. He's not doing a mitzvah by having the mashkon, and therefore he's intending it for his own benefit, and he's like an unpaid watchman because he's not doing a mitzvah here. So ironically, since he's using it, he's not doing a mitzvah, and he's a shomer chinam. Mr. Rabbi Kippur says, "Keeping the poches olav v'holech mitzvahi." Rabbi Kippur says, since he's diminishing his debt, his loan, he is doing a mitzvah, and he's a shomer sachar. Marasav mitzvah ka'avet. So Rabbi Kiva says he's doing a mitzvah, and therefore he loses everything. And Rabbi Eliezer says lav mitzvah ka'avet. He's not doing a mitzvah. So the Gemara then says, let's go back to Shmuel's ruling, and Shmuel says that if you lose the mashkon, you lose everything. Lema kitanai. Should we say that Shmuel's position is actually a machokas tanayim? Because we learned in the Bryce, Malvas Chavera Mashkon. Let's say you lend your friend money on a mashkon, and all of a sudden the Shemitah year comes, and the loan is supposed to be canceled. Even though the mashkon is only worth half the value of the loan, the sabbatical, the loan is not canceled. If the collateral was equal to the loan, then the Shemitah year is not canceled. Then otherwise the Shemitah year is canceled. What does it mean when we say the Shemitah year, the loan is not canceled? The Tanakama says, if you want to say it's not canceled corresponding to the value of the mashkon itself, so we see from here that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, even corresponding to the loan, it's also canceled. That doesn't make sense. My toughest mashkon. So for what reason did he grab the mashkon? So it must be Ella Lav Keneged Kuo. It must be that it's Ella Lav Keneged Kuo. It must be that the mashkon that the Shemitah year, the entire loan is not canceled. It will be the Shmuel Kamiflagi, and they're arguing that Shmuel's position. Mer says, no, well, Olam Keneged. It only doesn't cancel corresponding to the debt itself. And this is the Machokas. Tanakama Savar Kenegdo. Tanakama says that corresponding to the loan itself is not canceled. Even corresponding to the loan itself, to the mashkon itself, is canceled. The Kamra Samai Tafasai. So if that's the case, why did he grab the mashkon? The Zikron Verba, just to remind him that he has the loan, but not as a collateral, but just to remind him of it. So Hadron alach Shevuos Dayanim. We've we will return to you to this beautiful chapter called Shevuos Dayanim. We'll return to you Shevuos Dayanim. So now we come up to the next chapter, which is called Kol Nishbaim. Says the Mishnah, Kol Nishbaim Shabbatorah, Nishbaim Ro Mishalman. All the oaths that take place in the Torah, you take an oath and you don't end up paying. Ve'elu Nishbaim V'notan. And these are the oaths in which you take an oath and you take the money. What are these oaths? Hatzachir. The Sachir is a hired worker, the Mishnah is going to explain. A nigzal, a person who was robbed. A nechbal, a person who was damaged. The shekenegdo chashad al shvuot, the person who you have the complaint against is suspected of an oath. The chenvani al pinkaso, and the shopkeeper for his ledger. Hasachir ketzai, what's the case in which a hired worker takes an oath? Amar lo ten li schar sheyesh li biyadcha. If the worker says, "Give me my payment," well, Amar lo natalti, he said, the employer says, "I gave it." Well, the worker says, "Lo natalti." No, I never got it. Then the worker takes the oath and takes it. We're going to explain why. The employer is busy, so we told the worker to take the oath and take the money. So there has to be some partial admission. He says, "Give me my 50 dinar, which you made me get, which you said that you were going to give me." Kabati dinars off. Employer says, "You already got a portion of it." So that's the case. What's the case of nigzal? What's the case where the person who was robbed takes an oath? They testify, the witnesses testify this person went into the other person's house to take his mashkin without permission. The borrower says, "You took my utensils." He says, the lender says, "I didn't." The borrower takes the oath and takes it back. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, there needs to be some admission. He says, "You took 2 utensils." No, I only took 1. The next case, Nechbal Ketzad. What's the case of where he was damaged? They testified that a person entered this guy's house and he was undamaged. And he went out damaged. He says, "You damaged me." He says, "I didn't. I raised an ishma v'notah." One who was damaged takes an oath and takes it. Some say that the reason why this takana happened was because it's a special takana against violent people, or the other one is a special takana against people who steal. Rabbi Yehuda says you need a partial mission. You need a partial mission. Kate said, "He says, "You struck me twice." No, I only did 1. Okay, we'll stop here. This is today's daf. Beautiful daf. Yasher koach.